Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we are studying Daf Ayin of Masechta Shabbos. Just a quick overview before we begin. So this daf is kind of building on our Mishnah, the difference between when you're chayav one korban chatas or many more korban chatases. So we start off by saying what exactly is the difference between when you're chayav many korban chatases, when you're only chayav one chatas. What exactly is the reason for the distinction? Then we discuss the source for this idea of that you could bring many chataos for each, meaning one chatas per each unique melacha that you did. What's the source in the Torah for that? We'll have a few different reasons. At the end we ask, what if he doesn't realize the Shabbos and he also doesn't know about these melachos? Up until now, we've been assuming that he knows the melachos, but he doesn't realize the Shabbos, or he knows about Shabbos, he doesn't realize the melachos. What if he doesn't realize about any of them? How do we work out the korbanos requirements? So that's the daf today. I guess it's slightly technical, but it's also not that difficult. So here we go, friends. Let's jump in. So we're going to jump in, mamish, the last three words on daf samach tes amud beis. Here goes. Hayodea shehu Shabbos. Okay, now we're already on Ayin Amud Aleph. So somebody who knows that it is Shabbos. Okay, so if we said that if he knows that today is Shabbos, but he just didn't realize that these things aren't supposed to be done on Shabbos, so then he brings one korban per each unique melacha that he did. So mashna reisha, mashna seifa. So the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between the reisha and the seifa. What's the difference between when he knows about all the halachis and all the malachis of Shabbos, and he doesn't know, though, he messes up and he doesn't realize that today's Shabbos. So we say that he brings one korban for all of Shabbos. And when he knows that today is Shabbos, that he doesn't realize that these malachis shouldn't be done on Shabbos, then he brings one korban per each unique melacha. So what's the difference? So Amr Rav Safra, says the holy Rav Safra, Kan midias Shabbos hu porish, v'chan midias melacha hu porish. So the difference is that in the first case, when he doesn't realize that it's Shabbos, so he knows all the melachos of Shabbos, all the halachos of Shabbos. If he only would have known that today was Shabbos, he wouldn't be doing whatever he's doing right now. But somehow he messed up the days of the week, and he didn't realize that today is Shabbos. So in that case, when you say, hey brother, it's Shabbos today, so he'll say, oh, oops. And now that he realizes that it's Shabbos, he'll stop doing those melachos. So therefore, that's one kind of, because of the realization that it's Shabbos, he's now going to stop doing whatever he's doing. So he brings one korban for that realization. However, v'chan midias melacha hu porish. However, in the other case, it's he knows it's Shabbos, but he doesn't know that these melachos that he's doing you shouldn't be doing on Shabbos. And somebody says, hey, by the way, that those melachos that you shouldn't be doing those things on Shabbos. So he says, oh, oops, and it's the realization from each unique melacha that he's now separating himself from. So for each unique realization, he brings a korban chatas. That is how Rav Safra wants to learn it. That it has to do with kind of his, what's the point that is causing, what's the reason that he is separating himself from doing what he's doing. If it's for Shabbos, because he realizes oh, it's Shabbos, so he'll bring one korban for that one realization. If he realizes oh, these things are asur, I should stop doing them, so then he brings a korban for each one of those things. So Amalei Rav Nachman. So now Rav Nachman has kind of subtle question on Rav Safra, at least I find it to be somewhat subtle, which is klum parish mi Shabbos el mishum melachos v'chlum parish mi melachos el mishum Shabbos. So klum parish mi Shabbos el mishum melachos, meaning when this guy is doing melach on Shabbos because he doesn't realize that today is Shabbos. He knows that what he's doing he shouldn't do on Shabbos, he just doesn't realize that today is Shabbos. And then you say, hey buddy, today is Shabbos. So Rav Safra wanted to argue that, okay, it's that realization that, oh, it's Shabbos, and that's why he's stopping to do the melacha, and therefore he only brings one korban. But Rav Nachman wants to argue that klum parish mi Shabbos el mishum melacha. So when you tell him that it's Shabbos, he's not stopping because it's Shabbos, he's stopping because he realizes that these melachos he shouldn't be doing because it's Shabbos. But when you tell him it's Shabbos, he realizes oh, I shouldn't be doing these melachos. So Rav Nachman would say that based on that logic, he would argue that when he doesn't realize that today is Shabbos and he's doing these melachos, and you say, hey buddy, it's Shabbos, so Rav Nachman would want to argue that based on that approach, he should then have to bring multiple korbanos, one per each melacha, because when you tell him, hey, it's Shabbos, he realizes like, oh, I shouldn't be doing these melachos, right? And in the flip side of that, scenario, which is when he realizes that he knows that it's Shabbos, but he doesn't realize that he shouldn't be doing these melachos on Shabbos, and you say, hey, you shouldn't be doing these melachos today because it's Shabbos, and he says, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I shouldn't be doing this. Why shouldn't he be doing this? Because he knows that it's Shabbos. I.e., when you tell him you shouldn't be doing these melachos, he's saying, oh wow, I didn't realize I shouldn't be doing this melachos because I do know that after all it is Shabbos. In which case, Rav Nachman would argue that in that case he should only have to bring one korban. Okay. Ella Amar Rav Nachman, rather says Rav Nachman, korban d'chayev rachmana amai ashgaga. So rather, Rav Nachman says, look, and this is kind of how we've really been understanding it, I think. That's how I've been understanding it until now, which is that, what are you bringing a korban for? What are you bringing a korban chatas for? For your mistake. What's the mistake that he's making in each case? When you know that on Shabbos you don't do these 39 melachos, but you don't realize that today is Shabbos, so that's your mistake. Your mistake has one aspect to it. The aspect that you didn't realize that today is Shabbos. That's your only mistake. You know that you shouldn't be doing these melachos on Shabbos, you didn't realize today's Shabbos, so therefore you bring one korban for that one mistake. However, in the second case where he knows that today's Shabbos, he just didn't realize that I shouldn't be doing these things on Shabbos, well then he's making, one mistake for each melacha that he's doing. Each melacha that he's doing is an individual mistake that he's making. So therefore he would bring a unique korban for each unique mistake that he made. So we say that when you know that it is Shabbos, but you don't realize that these melachos, that these individual melachos that you're doing shouldn't be done on Shabbos, so you bring a korban for each one of those melachos. Chilik melachos minalan. So the Gemara wants to know, what is the source for this concept that you will bring a korban for each individual melacha that you are doing, as opposed to just saying that you will bring one korban for all of the melachos? Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra, Mechalelea mos yumas. So Shmuel says, well, we have a verse that says that somebody who's Mechalel Shabbos, mos yumas, shall surely die. And we want to say that that is plural. So rub some misos harbe achilul achas. So the Torah included included multiple misos, multiple deaths, for one chilul, for one violation of Shabbos. So we see that kilu, you violate Shabbos, and yet you can be chayav many times. But the Gemara says, one second, Hai b'mezid ksiv. This pasuk is talking about mezid, isn't it? Isn't it talking about somebody who violates Shabbos intentionally, and that's why it's saying that he's chayav misa? So why are we learning this out to be talking about shogeg, to say that he's chayav to bring multiple korbanos chatas, maybe? Okay, so the Gemara says, well, im eno inyan lemezid, tichsev kol ha'oseh bo melacha yumas. The Gemara says, actually, this pasuk is not talking about mezid, because we have a different pasuk that teaches us mezid, as it says, kol ha'oseh bo melacha yumas. Anybody who does melacha on Shabbos must die. So, what is this pasuk talking about when it says mechalelea mos yumas, once we already have that other pasuk? Taneu inyan l'shogeg. So this pasuk, therefore, must not be talking about mezid, it must be talking about shogeg. Umay yumas, then what does it mean that he dies? After all, if he's doing it b'shogeg, he's not chayiv misa. So you must be mamun. It means he should die with money. Meaning, he should spend money in order to buy korbanos because of those things that he violated on Shabbos. And that is how Shmuel wants to learn out that somebody who knows that it's Shabbos, but doesn't realize that these things are asur, and he accidentally does these melachos, so he will bring one korban. He will basically pay to purchase one korban for each of the melachos that he has done. The Gemara asks a kasha, friends. Why doesn't Shmuel the Amora, albeit the first generation Amora, but why does Shmuel the Amora learn out his own drasha of Mechalelea mos yumas? Why doesn't he learn it out in the same way that the Tana Reb Nosson learns it out? How does the Tana Reb Nosson learn it out? The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Reb Nosson Omer, says the holy Reb Nosson, L'sivayu eish b'chol mosh v'seichem b'yom HaShabbos. Do not kindle a fire in all of your dwellings on Shabbos. Okay. Matam lomar. How come the Torah specifically has to tell me don't kindle a flame on Shabbos? Meaning we already know not to do melacha on Shabbos. So, kindling a flame is one of the melachos. Okay, I know not to kindle a flame on Shabbos. Why, after telling us not to do melacha on Shabbos, does the Torah then go out of its way and say, don't kindle a flame? I know I shouldn't kindle a flame. I shouldn't do any of the melachos on Shabbos. So, Lefisha Nemar, Vayakal Moshe, es kol adas b'nei Yisrael, since the pasuk says, in Parshas Vayakel, it says that Moshe gathered all of Bnei Yisrael and he said to them, Eile hadvarim v'gomer. These are the things. Those are going to be the key words over here. Eile hadvarim. And then he says, Sheish es yom taisa melacha, that 6 days you work and then there's Shabbos. Okay. So dvarim hadvarim, right? So it says, and then Eile hadvarim. So it could have just said that Moshe said to him, Devarim. Why does it say Eile ha-Devarim, right? So it could have just said Devarim, instead it says ha-Devarim. We must be learning out something from the extra hay. And it could have just said Devarim, instead it says Eile ha-Devarim. So what are we learning out from all these things? What are we learning out from the extra hay? What are we learning out from the extra Eile? So Eilu shloshim v'teisha melachos shenemar l'Moshe b'Sinai. These are the 39 melachos that Moshe said to Har Sinai. How do we learn out 39 melachos from Eile ha-Devarim? So Rashi explains to us. Well, Devarim is plural. So the minimum of plural is 2. Ha-Devarim, that extra hey, is including another melacha, so that's already 3. Okay? Now Eile, in Gematria, its numerical value is 36. Right? Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, Hey is 5. So 36 plus 3 is 39. So that's how we learn out that there are 39 melachos. Okay. Yachal asan kulam behelem echad enuchayev ela'achas. Is it possible that if you inadvertently did all 39 melachos, you'd only be chayav 1 korban? Tamlomar b'char shuvakatzer tishbos. So we want to say that since we have a pasuk that says b'char shuvakatzer tishbos, that you have to rest from the plow and from the harvest. So that would teach us that that just like you'd be chayav individually for plowing and harvesting, you'd also be chayav individually for each and every melacha that you do. V'adayin ani omer. But still, I'll say, al charisha v'al ktsira chayiv shtayim v'kulan eno chayiv ela achas. Right? But the Gemara says, I'm not satisfied with that explanation to say that just like I'm chayiv for plowing and for harvesting individually, therefore I'm chayiv for all of the melachos that I do individually, because there's a concept of shnei ksuvim abayin ke'echad, right? 2 verses that come as one, meaning, in general, we have a principle called anybody who says Rabbi Shmuel Omer in the morning, that last paragraph after korbanos. So it says, Kol davar shehaya b'chlal v'yatsa min haklal lilamed lo lilamed al atzmo yatsa ela lilamed al haklal kulo yatsa. What does that mean? It means that if you have something that was initially included, right, with everything else, and then this one example was removed from that general law. So it's not just to teach about itself, it's to teach about everything. Okay? So therefore, on the one hand, we wanted to say that all the melachos are grouped together, right? Don't do melacha. That includes all melachos. Now, we have an exception over here, and we're singling out plowing and harvesting. And we're saying that you're chayiv for those individually. So our initial thought was to say that just like you're chayiv for those 2 things individually, you're also chayiv for any melacha like all the melachas that you do, you'd be chayiv a korban chayatos for each individual unique melacha, right? Now here's the thing. This idea of when you had things that were included and then it was excluded, so it teaches about everything else, that you can kind of bring it back to learn about everything else, that's only if you have one thing that leaves the general category, right? So it was included in the general category and it left, and it's like, that's peculiar. Why is only one thing singled out? It must be that we want to learn from it to everything else. However, when you have 2 things that leave the general principle, well then it's what's called shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad. You have basically these 2 things that are coming as one, meaning it's only unique to these 2 things. Since we have charish and katsir that are removed from the general principle, so then we cannot apply the halachas to those two back to everything else. And we say that whatever halacha will be applied to charish and katsir is only unique to charish and katsir. We can't then apply it back to the general group. And therefore, while we'll say that harvesting and plowing you will be chayiv for individually, that's it. You can't say that every melacha you'll be chayiv for individually, right? So again, v'adayin ani omer, still I'll say, al charisha ve'al aktsira chayiv shtaim. Sure, if you plow and you harvest, you'll be chayiv twice, i.e. one chatas for each. V'akulan eino chayiv ela achas. But if I do all the rest of them, I'll only be chayiv one korban. So tamuloma lo sivayru eish. Therefore, we have this pasuk of do not kindle a flame on Shabbos, right? Havara b'chlalaisa, kindling a flame was included with all the rest of the melachos. V'lama yatzos, how come this one melacha of havara left the group? La'akish elea v'lo melach, to compare this one to the rest of the group. Ma'avara shehi av melacha, just like kindling, which is an av melacha, v'chayav anelea b'fnei atzma, and you will be chayiv for it, on its own, that if you kindle, you'll be chayiv for kindling. Av kol shu av melacha chayav anelea b'fnei atzma. So also anything that is an av melacha, you'll be chayiv for individually, and therefore, just like you're chayiv for kindling a flame, well, you'll also be chayiv for each and every unique melacha that you do. Okay? No, so that's how Reb Nosson learns out that you're chayiv for every single melacha that you do on Shabbos. So, how come Shmuel is learning it out from Mechalel Amos Yumas? Why not learn it out like the Tana, Reb Nosson, and learn it out from Havara L'chalek Yatzos? So, Shmuel Saver La Reb Yossi. So, the answer is that Shmuel doesn't hold like Reb Nosson, he holds like his Bar Plugta. He holds like the one who argues on him, which is the holy Reb Yossi. Damer Havara Lilav Yatzos, who disagrees with Reb Nosson and says that the reason why why kindling was singled out from the rest of the melachos was not to say that you can be chayiv a korban for it, and not only that, but you can be chayiv a korban for every single melacha that you do. No. It was singled out to teach that actually you're not chayiv a korban for kindling. All of the rest of the melachos, if you violate them by accident, you're chayiv a korban. Kindling is the exception, and that's why it was removed from the group, to say that kindling you will actually not be chayiv a korban for. It's just a lav in general. You got lashes. Alright? Doesn't sound so fun. I feel like I'd rather bring a korban than get lashed. Okay, but nobody asked me, I guess. In any event, Rabbi Yossi says, Havara lilav yatzas. Okay? That the reason why the melacha of kindling was removed from the group was to teach that kindling actually, there's no chiyuv kares, there's no korban chatas, rather it's just a general lo saseh, don't do it. The Tanya, as we learn in a brisa, Havara lelav yatzaz div Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that the reason why Havara was singled out was to teach that it's only a lav. Reb Nosson omer lechalek yatzaz, whereas the holy Reb Nosson says that Havara was singled out to say that just like Havara, you would be chayiv a korban chatas for, so also every single melacha that you violate on Shabbos, you would be chayiv a korban chatas. V'teipukle l'chiluk melachos mehechad l'nafkale Rabbi Yossi. No. So if Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi regarding Havara lav yatzas, well then why doesn't he also hold like Rabbi Yossi regarding how Rabbi Yossi learns out chiluk melachos? How Rabbi Yossi learns out that you'd be chayiv for each unique melacha that you do. The Tanyas, we learn in a brisa, Rabbi Yossi, Omer says the holy Rabbi Yossi, ve'asa me'achas mehena. Okay, the pasuk says in the context of korban chatas that he does me'achas mehena, from one of these things. Why doesn't it just say ve'asa achas hena? What's the additional me'achas mehena? These extra mems from them. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can learn out. So paimim shechayavim achas al kulan ufaimim shechayavim. So what Rabbi Yossi says is that sometimes, right, paimim, sometimes shechayav achas al kulan, sometimes you can be chayav once, one korban, even though you did a whole bunch of melachas, okay, ufaim shechayavin al kol achas v'achas, and sometimes you can be chayav to bring a korban for each unique melacha, okay, as we've been seeing up until now, but now we're going to expand it and go into detail. From Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina, and says Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina, my time of Rabbi Yossi, how do we explain Rabbi Yossi, his me'achas, me'hena, how does it translate to his opinion about sometimes you chayav one korban, sometimes you chayav many korbanos? So let's see. So, achas, me'achas, hena, me'hena. Okay? So, it could have just said achas, and instead of it says me'achas. It could have just said hena, instead it says me'hena. Okay? Achas shei hena, hena shei achas. So sometimes you can have one Shabbos and you do multiple melachos, and you can be chayav for each and every one. Hena shei achas. And sometimes you can do multiple melachos and you're only going to be chayav one korban. Okay? Achas shimin, me achas shem mishimin. So when it says achas, so that means if you do a full malacha, such as if you write the word Shimon, but guess what? Me achas, from achas, even shem mishimin. Even if you just write shem, shin mem, you didn't write the whole shin mem ayin vav nun, nonetheless, because shem because shin mem is a word in its own right, so then you're still going to be chayav for writing. Hena avos, mehena tolados. When it says hena, it means avos melachos. Mehena means even tolados. Fine. Achashi hena. So when we say that sometimes you can, be chayav several korban chatos on one Shabbos. So of course this is Zadon Shabbos v'shigagas melachos. This, as we know by now, is when you know that it's Shabbos, you just didn't realize that these are melachos, so you bring a korban for each melacha. Hena shei achas. When we say that sometimes you can do a bunch of melachos and only be chayav one korban, shigagas Shabbos v'zadon melachos, that is when you did a whole bunch of melachos and you knew that they were melachos, but you didn't realize that it's Shabbos. So the question is, why doesn't Shmuel learn out like Rabbi Yossi, that we learn out that you're chayav multiple korbanos chatas from me'achas mehena? So Shmuel achas she hena vehena she achas lo mashmale. So Shmuel doesn't learn out that whole achas she hena she achas thing. He just learns that me'achas mehena is referring to like shem mishimon and that stuff, but he doesn't necessarily learn it out to be referring to chilik melachos. Okay, fine. By minei Rav mir Rav Nachman. Oh, so Rav asked a kasha from Rav Nachman. Okay, what if he didn't realize that today's Shabbos, and even if he would have known that today's Shabbos, he didn't know that these melachos aren't allowed to be done? Okay, so up until now we've been kind of doing either or, right? Either you know the halachos of Shabbos, but you didn't realize that today was Shabbos, or you know that today's Shabbos, but you didn't realize that these things shouldn't be done on Shabbos. What if you didn't know either one? You didn't realize that today's Shabbos, you thought it was Sunday, and also even if you knew that it was Shabbos, still, like you didn't realize that these things that he's doing, he shouldn't be doing. So, Amarle, Hare Helim Shabbos v'yado ve'enu chayv ela achas. So, Rav Nachman said to Rava, he said, okay, well, we treat it, look, he didn't know that it was Shabbos, and because he didn't know it was Shabbos, so he brings one korban chatas for that. So, Adrabah, the opposite. It sounds like meaning Rava probably said to Rav Nachman, no, the opposite would make sense. We should say that he didn't realize, he didn't know about each of these individual melachos that he was doing, so he should have to bring a korban for each melacha. Okay, so that's inconclusive. Ela Amar Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi tries to answer this by saying, Chazinan, well, let's just ask him. He'll come to the Beis HaMikdash, he'll say, look, I want to bring a korban chatas, I was accidentally Mechal Shabbos, and we'll say, wow, what'd you do? So, Mishum Shabbos Kaparesh, Hare Helim Shabbos Biado. So if he says, look, I didn't realize that it was Shabbos, and that's why I did Melacha. So we'll say, oh, okay, you didn't realize it was Shabbos. Okay, so the halacha is when you don't realize that it's Shabbos, so then you bring one korban chatas. And if he comes to the Beis Hamikdash and we say, hey, what do you want to bring a korban chatas for? And he says, yeah, I didn't realize that these things I shouldn't be doing on Shabbos. Well, then he'll bring a unique korban for each melacha that he did. So we ask him and we see based on his response how many korbanos you have to do. So well, then Ravina asks Rav Ashi the same question that Rav Nachman asked Rav Safar earlier, which is, Klum parish mishabes el mishum melachos. No, when you tell him that it's Shabbos, he stop doing what he does is he stops doing these melachos. So therefore, when you tell him it's Shabbos, he should have to bring multiple melachos based on that logic. Right? Klum parish melachos el mishum Shabbos. The only reason why he stops doing the melachos is because it's Shabbos, so therefore in that case he should only have to bring one. Okay. So Ella lo shna. Rather, Ravina's opinion is that it doesn't matter. No matter what his response will be, he only brings one korban for everything. So Ravina's opinion is that when he doesn't know it's Shabbos, and even if he would have known it's Shabbos, he didn't know that these melachos we shouldn't be doing anyways. So in that case, you just bring one korban, and that is that. Fine. Now, this is basically very similar to something that we saw yesterday. Okay, this is the last sort of stretch of today's daf. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Avos melachos arbaim chaser achas. There are 39 melachos. Vavinan bam, we ask, minyan olamali, how come we have to tell us how many there are? Why can't I just count them? Vam Rabbi Yochanan shemasan kulam be'elam echad, chayav kol achas v'achas. And of course, Rabbi Yochanan said, well, it's to teach us that if you did all of these melachos without realizing that there are melachos, you'll be chayav for each individual one. Okay. Now, iyamar b'shlam ehelim zeh v'zeh b'yado chayav kol achas v'achas shapir. So the Gemara wants to say, well, I understand if you would say that when you don't realize it's Shabbos and you don't realize that these melachos are asuros, well, and you were saying that you'll be chayav for each and every melacha that you did, well, I get it. We're saying that there are 39 melachos. It tells us that there are 39 to say that you'll be chayav in each individual one. But if you say that when, like Ravina, that when he doesn't realize it's Shabbos, and he also doesn't realize that these melachos shouldn't be done on Shabbos, so then he's only chayav one korban, well then, what is the situation where he's going to be chayav for each melacha that he did? So the Gemara says, well, bizadun Shabbos v'shigas melachos. When he knows that it's Shabbos, and he just didn't realize that these things are melachos, that is when you would bring a korban for each and everything that you did. Okay? Hanicha yisav like Rabbi Yochanan, as we said yesterday. Well, this makes sense if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Damar kevan sheshagag b'chares af al pi she'ezeh bilav. Right? Rabbi Yochanan said that when it comes to bring a korban chatas for a melacha that you do on Shabbos, even if you know that you should not be doing the melacha, and you do it anyways, however, what you didn't know is that there's a chiyuv kares associated with the melacha, okay? That would be enough to be considered shogeg, and you could bring a korban chatas, so I get it, right? You knew that the 39 melachas shouldn't be done on Shabbos. You did all 39 of them anyways, and you knew that it was Shabbos. What you didn't know is that you chayav kares for these 39 melachos, so you bring 39 korbanos. So came to shagag b'chares afalpi she'ezeh bilav. So mishkachas ad yadulei Shabbos bilav. So he knew that it was Shabbos. Kilud zadon Shabbos. He knew that it was Shabbos, right? And that it's Shabbos, and therefore I shouldn't be doing these 39 melachos. And he did them, but he didn't know that there was kares. So he brings a korban for each. Eli yisavela krib Shimon ben Lakish. But what about according to Reish Lakish? The Amar ad sheyishgog bilav v'chares. The Yadalei Shabbos b'mai. But according to Shimon ben Lakish, according to Reish Lakish, he says that in order to be able to bring a korban chatas, you had to have not known that the malacha that you were doing shouldn't be done on Shabbos at all, let alone chayav kares for it. Well, if that's the case, as we asked yesterday, how would it be possible for him to, on the one hand, know that it's Shabbos, yet on the other hand, not, violate all 39 melachos without even knowing that there were melachos in the first place? So then what does it mean that he knows that it's Shabbos? In what does he know about it being Shabbos? I mean, right? How is Shabbos different than any other days if he doesn't know about any of the melachos? So the Gemara answers, that he knew one thing, and that was that on Shabbos you don't walk more than 2,000 amas outside of the city, like Rabbi Akiva's opinion that it's d'oraisa, yet it's not counted in the 39. So that's what he knew. But the other 39 he didn't know, and he did all of them, and that's when he's chayav 39 korbanos. Okay, that's daf ayin of Masechta Shabbos. Let's do a review. At the beginning, we started off by explaining the distinction between when Zadon Shabbos v'shigas melachos, when you know that it's Shabbos, yet you don't know that these melachos shouldn't be done, that you have, and you bring a korban for each one, as opposed to Zadon melachos v'shigas Shabbos, when you know that you shouldn't be doing these melachos, but what you don't realize is that it's Shabbos today, in which case you just bring one korban. So Rav Safra said, well, it depends what he's separating from, right? When he doesn't realize that it's Shabbos, but he knows, but you do all these melachos, so when you say, hey buddy, it's Shabbos, he says, oh, oops, let me not do this anymore. So he's separating from Shabbos, that's why you bring one korban. Yet, when he knows that it's Shabbos, he doesn't know that these melachos shouldn't be done. So when you say to him, hey, you know these melachos shouldn't be done today, so then he says, oh, oops, I better stop. So he's stopping, he's separating himself from each of these unique melachos, so he brings a korban for each one. Rav Nachman wasn't into that, because in his mind, it's the opposite. You're actually, when you say, hey, it's Shabbos today, and he says, oh, oops, so he's separating from doing the malachos. So in that case, Rav Nachman would argue that you would bring unique korbanos, whereas when you say, hey, you shouldn't be doing these malachos on Shabbos, he's only going to stop because it's Shabbos, so then you would bring one, whatever. So Rav Nachman disagreed with in principle how he views it. Rather, Rav Nachman says it's based on where is the mistake occurring. Right? If the mistake is occurring on the fact that he didn't realize it's Shabbos, which is only one mistake, so he brings one korban. If the mistake is he didn't realize that each of these malachos are malachos on Shabbos, well then he brings multiple korbanos to represent each of his mistakes that he made regarding each unique malacha. What is the source for this concept that you can bring a korban for each unique malacha that you do? So Shmuel said it comes from the pasuk of Mechalolea Mos Yumas. Now the Gemara wanted to say, well, why doesn't Shmuel learn it out from the same source as the Tana, Reb Nassan, who learns it out from the fact that the pasuk of Lo Sivaru Eish B'chol Moshvosechem, do not kindle a fire on Shabbos, was separated from the rest of the 39 melachos. And Reb Nassan's opinion is that it was separated in order to teach us that just like you'd be chayav achatas for kindling a flame, you'd also be chayav achatas for each unique malacha that you do on Shabbos. So Shmuel didn't hold like that because he held like Rabbi Yossi, who argues on Reb Nassan. Rabbi Yossi says that the pasuk of Lo Sivaru Eish B'chol Moshvosechem was separated to teach that whereas all the rest of the 39 melachos you'd be chayav kares and korban chatas if it was by accident, kindling a flame is simply a lav. It's simply a lo sa'aseh, and therefore it doesn't teach us that you would be chayav for each a korban for each melacha that you do individually. So that of course is the machlokas of havara lelav yatzas or lechalek yatzas. So Reb Nassan's opinion is havara lechalek yatzas, to teach that you chayav a korban for each individual melacha that you do, whereas Reb Yossi's opinion is havara lelav yatzas, to teach that kindling is only a lav, you wouldn't be chayav kares or a korban chatas. But then the Gemara says still, but why doesn't Shmuel hold like Rabbi Yossi, who learns out that there are multiple korban chatas from me achas mehena, right? That he learns out that there's achas shehena, hena shehi achas, right? Sometimes you could be chayiv multiple korbanos, and sometimes you can be chayiv only one korban. So we said, well, Shmuel doesn't learn, to say that Rabbi Yossi holds out from me achas mehena requires the explanation of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina the Amora. Shmuel does not agree with that explanation. He says that me'achas mehena is only to teach us things like shem mishimon and also avos and tolados. Fine. Okay, fine. So Shmuel holds from Mechalolea Mos Yumas. Now what happens if you don't realize that it's Shabbos and you also don't realize that these melachos shouldn't be done on Shabbos? So Rav Ashi's opinion, Rav Ashi says that, well, we ask him, right? And if he says, I was refraining from doing it because it was Shabbos, so then he brings one korban. If he says, if he comes and says, look, I want to bring a korban chatas because, I did melacha on Shabbos, so then he brings one korban chatas. But if he comes and says, look, I want to bring a korban chatas because I did all of these melachas, so then he would bring unique melachos, whereas Ravina disagreed, and he said, no, you would only bring one korban. And then at the end there, we kind of got back into that kind of distinction that we had yesterday between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding bring 39 unique, bring a korban for each unique melacha that you do. According to Reish Lakish, if he says that you only bring a korban chatas, if you don't even know that the thing you're doing is asur, so then what does it mean that he knows that it's Shabbos but doesn't know that all 39 melachos are not allowed to be done? Then what makes it Shabbos? He says that what makes it Shabbos is that he knows that you shouldn't walk 2,000 amos outside of a city. Okay, that was today's daf. A little bit technical, but also not too bad. Kind of moved. All right, have an awesome day, everyone. Peace.